Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 5th of February now. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that, of course, by using your NOAA Weather Radio or by heading to the website at weather.gov, and you can get the entire national view there. Or if you go to weather.gov/Alaska, you can get the statewide view, the same as you'll find at arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office on Twitter under NWS Anchorage, NWS Fairbanks, or NWS Juneau, or of course any of the other national offices. U.S. National Weather Service Alaska is found on Facebook, and you'll get some more information like what you're about to see here on the show, but sometimes you get that a little bit earlier in the day. And of course on YouTube, during the afternoon, you get your daily afternoon map briefing with the surface charts at around 3:45 to 4 o'clock or so. That's on YouTube, and it's about 2.5 minutes long or so. So if you kind of check that you'd like to get those updates in your YouTube account, you can get them as soon as they're available. Or after this show, you can go to alaskapublic.org or on YouTube searching for AKWX TV and subscribe that way as well and get the entire Alaska Weather Show online after the show has been uploaded. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation tonight. Nothing going on in southeast. Things are breezy but relatively clear, dry, a little bit cool, but no weather watches out or warnings for your area right now. Looking to south central, we see some red areas there across the western parts of the Kenai Peninsula and around the Matanuska Valley. Those are red flag warnings at this point now. They were fire weather watches, now red flag warnings. We are concerned about the amount of wind that is potentially going to move through the Matanuska Valley and down the Cook Inlet, including parts of the western Kenai Peninsula as we get into Thursday evening and into Friday. With the wind and the low humidity as a result of the lack of snow cover, the opportunity for fires to spread and grow quickly is a problem. So the red flag warnings have been hoisted in those areas. And we also have a high wind watch out for the Matanuska Valley there. That will start up about the same time. We're looking for the potential for gusts upwards of 80 miles per hour. We'll have more on that in just a minute. Looking a little bit farther northward into the interior, winter weather advisories from the south slopes of the Brooks Range all the way into the upper Koyukuk Valley and into the Tanana Valley and around the Yukon Flats. Most areas there won't be dealing with a tremendous amount of snow, but the wind may stir up the snow that is on the ground, especially over some of the higher passes and summits there. As a result, visibility may drop, and it might impact your travel if you are traveling along some of those highways like the Steese. On the north side of the summits, we're looking at winter storm warnings. There will be a little more snow accumulation in that area. Across the Beaufort Seacoast, we have winter storm warnings and blizzard warnings at this point for Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse out toward Kaktovik, and a winter storm warning here for the north slopes. This, again, across the Arctic coast will mainly be due to the moving wind from the west around 35 miles per hour, or maybe even greater, and you'll see that reflected in the marines here, in the marine maps when we get to the end of the show. And also we have winter weather advisory there for areas around Barrow. So a lot going on across the north and the interior, mainly due to the wind that's moving southward, and that will eventually affect us here in south central as well. Out across southwest, things are pretty quiet for now. One thing we're going to talk about that isn't actually drawn in or circled or colored in on the map just yet is the effects on Kodiak Island. We'll be watching on Friday to see if the wind and snow come together. There's an opportunity for snow for you, and if there's enough wind and snow at the same time, that might push in on some blizzard let's say this the right way, the kind of approach the level of blizzards there for Kodiak Island. So not quite reaching that criteria just yet, but we're getting pretty close. So winter weather, sure, snow, wind, maybe, but if it all comes together just right, that might reach the level of blizzard. So we'll have to see again for Friday. That is potential, but not quite in the forecast just yet. Let's go back to the Matanuska Valley. The jet stream, as you'll see in a few minutes with the aviation charts, making a huge upside-down shaped U across the Bering Sea, and then the nose of that pointing right into interior and south central Alaska as we get into tomorrow night and especially into Friday. Because we've got a big ball of very dense cold air across the Yukon working into the eastern parts of the interior of Alaska in the Copper River Basin, all it wants to do is find its lowest possible place, and it will be channeled and pushed through parts of the valleys, including the Matanuska Valley. Well, as you know from living in places like Palmer, sometimes that wind can really pick up, and when it has a little bit of help in moving down the valley, it picks up speed. Sometimes you refer to that as a Bora wind. In this case, it looks like we may see the conditions set up to really channel that wind through fairly quickly. If that happens and everything remains as it looks right now, the potential for that wind could reach as high as 80 miles per hour. That'll probably happen sometime Thursday night and into Friday morning. The lowest sustained winds could be somewhere on the order of 30 to 40 miles per hour. There's potential they could be stronger than that. The highest we think they may gust, that would be the high end of any wind, would be around 80 miles per hour. In Matanuska Valley, one of those places, the Copper River Basin may be dealing with some strong winds as well, perhaps not quite to this level, but again, that would be one of those favored places. On top of the wind, like we're talking with the Matanuska Valley and the western Kenai, we have the fire danger, low humidity, low snow cover, dry conditions there, and a lot of wind that would encourage fire growth if it were to start. So fire danger again, back to high levels there for the Matanuska Valley and parts of the western Kenai. It's something that probably not too used to there in January and February, but here we are. After that warm January period, this is what comes after. Now, looking out to what's going on with the satellite imagery, you can see that upper level pattern taking shape. Here's our low pressure system, pretty strong one there west of the Kamchatka Peninsula, moving a little bit north and west of Petropavlovsk. This is following that jet stream pattern that's developing. The bright white clouds are kind of leading the pack of that jet nose, as it were, that jet stream pattern itself, the fast-moving river of air that steers all the surface weather that we experience. And as this is carving that path out, it will lead to more of that colder flow working its way into the interior and eventually steering most of that cold air probably into the Yukon and the eastern interior and eventually the lower 48. But it's that strong push of northerly flow in the upper atmosphere that will help to push that colder air and squeeze it through some of the valleys and eventually let it speed up. Now, it may not produce terribly cold weather as far as the actual thermometer readings go, but it may actually warm things up a little bit as that air descends in elevation. However, with the fast-moving wind, and of course it's not terribly warm outside as it is right now in south central Alaska or really any place, with moving wind and the temperatures that we have, a colder wind chill may be experienced. So it's something to keep in mind there. Wind chill values may become an issue as we head into Thursday, Friday, especially Thursday night and into Friday and maybe into the weekend. As we look at southeast, things are pretty dry there. Haven't seen a whole lot of cloud cover. Sure, there's probably some areas of fog there, but with the winds moving around a little bit, we've stirred up the air a little bit more than normal across some parts of the inner channels. A lot of what we're seeing across the interior in the Yukon is mainly clear. That's just the cold ground being reflected to the satellite. This thin ribbon of clouds today was moving across Fairbanks, and we actually saw a little bit of light snow passing through the Tanana Valley earlier today. And also saw some gusty winds up across the Chukchi Seacoast, some of those on the order of 35 to 50 knots earlier today. The winds will be moving eastward along the Beaufort Seacoast as we go ahead into the next couple days. Out across the west, pretty clear conditions there around parts of the southern Bering. Didn't see a whole lot of fog there across the southern Bering or the North Pacific at this point. A lot of that drier air making it off the continent is having an impact of what we're seeing out across some of the southern Bering and the North Pacific at this point. A little bit of low clouds there east of Kodiak Island, wrapping into some stable air there across the east and central parts of the Pacific. On to the surface charts now. High pressure is large and in charge across the Yukon, 1,055 millibars. This ridge is trying to work its way down to the Matanuska Valley. It's also stretching its way out across the central and eastern Bering Sea at over 1,040 millibars there. You can see the beginnings of low pressure here across the north. That's going to drop south with a cold front as we get into tonight, working its way across the northwest, closer to Nome, bringing some snow into places like Shishmaref and the Brooks Range, increasing the wind speed across the Beaufort Seacoast and blowing through Nome, the Brooks Range. So watch for some chop. If you're still flying tonight, there's probably going to be an increase in the winds as we get into tonight. Low pressure is forming just south and east of the Kenai Peninsula, trough of low pressure across southeast. That'll keep the wind moving a little bit across southeast. Areas of light rain across the Aleutians and pockets of fog will start to develop across the Bering Sea. A front cruises across southwest Alaska tomorrow and down across the Alaska Range. With that, we start to set up that really strong pressure gradient from the Chukchi Sea, where a ridge of high pressure there, a dome of it, in fact, at 1,054 millibars, starts to work with the trough of low pressure here, and it probably should have drawn a low sitting just off of southeastern Kenai. With that, we expect to see the front just drop southward quickly and actually merge with another storm that's not even on the chart at this point. High pressure across the Yukon is still in place, but it's giving way to this colder air mass dropping southward quickly. And as we get into Friday, here's our next storm sitting across the Gulf. And in this feature will probably sit across the Gulf for the bulk of the weekend and maybe even into the early part of next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, not even out of the question. And if this weather pattern stays in place, there's really nothing to say that we won't have a lot of wind across south central. It may ebb and flow and surge with additional highlights perhaps for high winds, maybe once or twice during that period. But it may be rather breezy across the coastal areas, across Prince William Sound, the north and eastern coast, and even southeastern Alaska, with blowing and drifting snow across the interior if we maintain all these black lines on the map, which would be a mark of that pressure gradient. So again, a ridge of high pressure here, a vacuum or a void of low pressure here, and all the air is trying as hard as it can to fill into that void. That creates the wind that we see across our planet and certainly across Alaska at this point. The winds may also be kind of strong across the central and eastern parts of the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, especially in areas that have that favored gap potential for stronger gusts there. So something to keep in mind as we go into the weekend and the end of the week for sure. 30s today across most of southeast. A lot of sunshine for many of you in the Panhandle. Hopefully you've enjoyed that there. 20s and 30s the farther north you go toward Haines and Skagway. In the western parts of Canada, temps were sub-zero in many places there. 3 around Eagle. Teens and 20s for parts of the Copper River Basin. Northward as you went into the central and eastern Alaska Range there, you got to about 11 in Fairbanks with snow there at around Gulkana and Glen Allen. We saw temps hovering a little bit closer to zero. Farther north still, most areas were hovering at or below zero. Around Prince William Sound, though, temps were in the 20s and 30s. Kodiak Island, you saw there at 42. 1 in Fort Yukon, 10 in Anaktuvuk Pass, with the winds picking up for you tonight and tomorrow. Teens along the Arctic coast, 24 in Kaktovik. As the winds stay up, temperatures should be a little bit milder there as well. 20s around most of Kotzebue Sound, including Shishmaref at 23, 24 in Nome. St. Lawrence Island was 30 degrees, McGrath 20 degrees. The YK Delta and most of the communities there were hovering in the low to mid 30s. A little bit farther south into Bristol Bay, temps were closer to 40 degrees today. Sandpoint 43 degrees, Cold Bay and False Pass not too far behind. Cold Bay was one of the warmer spots today at 46 degrees. St. Paul and St. George hovering close to 40 degrees, and on either side of 40 degrees, Adak and Atka today, 39 and 43 degrees respectively. Looking at temperatures overnight, you'll notice the central and eastern interior going well below zero. Fort Yukon at 27 below, Fairbanks 17 below. Teens and 20s for most areas across southeast. South central still looking at lows in the low to mid-teens. A little bit of a breeze tonight. 4 in Talkeetna, 13 below in Glen Allen. Tanana looking at 7 below as that colder air drops southward. Around the upper Koyukuk Valley, expect temperatures anywhere from 7 below and then warming as you go downriver somewhat. As you get out toward Norton Sound, temperatures there above zero, 19 in Unalakleet, 16 in Nome, lower 30s for Bristol Bay, and mid to upper 30s for south and western Alaska and parts of the chain. 40 degrees tomorrow around Cold Bay and False Pass. Southwest looking at temps at or just above freezing until you get north of the YK Delta. And most areas there still in the upper 20s and lower 30s. Nome 29 degrees. You'll notice most of the interior now back in the teens and 20s as that air is starting to move a little bit faster. It won't be as easy for it to be terribly cold. Single digits and teens for the Arctic coast. South central looking at 20s and 30s. Kodiak down to 37. Southeast 20s and 30s for you. Sitka looking at 36. Juneau closer to 27. Flying weather tomorrow, as you would expect, will become a little more difficult as you looked at the Arctic coast. IFR conditions there. Same goes for parts of the interior along the Alaska Range, and MVFR conditions for a wide swath of the Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska. Pass conditions expected to go over to IFR for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see decreasing visibility, and the cloud deck will be dropping, and Rainy Pass through the afternoon. Windy Pass expected to go over to IFR conditions. Same goes for Isabel Pass tomorrow. Instrument flight rule expected in Mentasta Pass by the end of the day. Tanita Pass may maintain VFR, though it'll probably be close. Porter's Pass, VFR conditions are expected to last through tomorrow, and Chilkoot and White Pass will maintain VFR. Here's a look at the freezing levels once again, and yesterday we were talking about freezing rain potential across south and western parts of Alaska and the Yukon Valley. That's starting to subside somewhat, but you can still see a wealth of warm air punched way up into eastern parts of Russia as the surface freezing line hugs the Gulf Coast and parts of the southwestern coast. Icing potential will maintain below 5,000 feet, mainly across the northern parts of the Yukon and across the eastern Alaska range, but that's the main threats for that, mostly not in Alaska. We'll mainly be dealing with wind and turbulence more than anything else. High pressure across the Gulf of Anadyr driving that jet streak, and especially that faster moving part within the jet streak down across central parts of Alaska into south central at over 140 to 150 knots, moving southward again. The main core of the jet well to our south at this point. At 9,000 feet, we have pretty much a northerly flow setting up across the entire state. More of northwesterlies moving into southeastern Alaska with another wave of low pressure south of Haida Gwaii. Across the Aleutians, you're looking at north and easterly winds moving into about the central Aleutians before those winds return on a southeasterly note across the western parts of the chain. A very similar pattern at 3,000 feet. The strongest core of the winds still moving across the Brooks Range tomorrow, around 20 to as high as 50 knots, coming into Barrow and parts of Wainwright. Winds descending off the Alaska Range will probably create some low-level wind shear, and this will likely worsen as we get through the afternoon and into the evening hours, and then really pick up in intensity as we get into early Friday morning. So if you have plans to fly the end of the week, things will be changing as you go through the rest of the week. Turbulence potential anywhere above 1,000 feet. You're going to run into some occasional widespread moderate probably. Areas around south central and southwestern Alaska anywhere above 2,000 feet. But again, this is going to be changing as we go into the afternoon, the evening, and into Friday morning there. And by Friday, I would not be surprised to see isolated, severe, probably low-level wind shear in many places around Alaska. So again, keep your eye on the sky and fly safe. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with marine weather here in just a few minutes. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the Day-Night Band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon,
That's
depending
that
on
swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
It happens quite a bit in Alaska. Yeah.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image.
Sure. Yep.
That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible.
Okay, right.
The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery.
Okay.
Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in.
Okay.
It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora.
Wow.
And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
But this looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. Sure, we can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about GINA and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. I don't know about the guy in the brown coat, but I love the day-night band at work. It's really cool to listen to. Here's a look at southeast. Thursday's marine forecast. You can still see it's a little breezy across the northern and southern Lynn Canal. A north wind around 20 knots or so with a 4-foot sea. North and easterly flow coming down from Stevens Passage and across the southern inner channels around 10 to 15 knots. And then across the coast, you're looking at more of a north and westerly, or south and westerly flow moving up toward Yakutat and into Gustavus, but we still have that offshore flow going south of Sitka and in toward the Dixon entrances. They're blowing from the north and east. Around 5 to 6 foot seas are expected there. And then Friday changes with low pressure developing south and east of the Kenai Peninsula. It's going to start dragging in a lot more air up the coast, and it's going to pick up speed around 10 knots there outside of the Dixon entrance, 25 to 30 knots there with higher gusts expected out of the entrances, of course. And a north and easterly flow continues across some of the inner channels, but the wind speeds are picking up 15 to 25 knots. So already we can see some of those changes affecting southeast, even though that storm is not right over you. And across south central around Thursday, we've got a variable flow in the northern parts of the Cook Inlet, only a 1-foot sea here, but we can already detect some changes coming across the Barren Islands and the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula with winds around 25 to 30 knots. Inside and outside of Prince William Sound, 10 to 15 knots with westerlies moving across and out of Homer, around 20 to 25 knots. Kodiak looking at 15 knots on the eastern side with a 6-foot sea. Shelikof Strait up to 20. And then Friday, wow, with low pressure sitting here already, we're dragging a tremendous amount of air down the Cook Inlet and out of Prince William Sound and across the western parts of the Gulf between 40 and 50 knots, and seas coming up to about 10, 16, 17 feet with higher gusts out of the Copper River Basin. Plan for that. And running down the Cook Inlet, 40, 50, even 60 knot winds there west of the Barren Islands. So again, Friday is going to be a game changer across South Central. Across the Alaska Peninsula, 15 to 20 knots on the Bering Sea side. Pacific side also 15 to 20, but 6 to 8 foot seas there as we get into Thursday. Not a whole lot of change there into Friday. 15 knots there on the north side, 15 to 20 knots on the south side. Seas still running around 6 to 8 feet, so not a whole lot of impacts right there. An easterly flow sweeping across the Aleutians on Thursday. Again, the big impacts will be out across the east. Looking for 20, 25, 30 knots there from Unalaska out toward Adak, 12 to 15 foot seas there from Kiska out toward Shemya, and 10 to 11 foot seas on the Pacific side. As you get into Friday, more of a northerly flow. It picks up a little bit more around Nikolsky and Unalaska, 40 to 45 knots. And looking at some waves around 8, 9, even 12 feet as you get out toward the west with more of a southeasterly return flow on that west side of the ridge there around Shemya, so probably a little bit milder there as well. So changes there in the south and the east as we get into Friday. What about the west coast? A northerly flow continues there between 15 and 25 knots from Gamble to St. Lawrence Island. Freezing spray is a threat there south of the ice edge. A northeasterly flow around the Pribilofs at 25 knots, up to 35 knots by Friday, up to 45 knots out of the Kuskokwim Bay area. 14-foot seas are expected there, 35 knots from Nunivak Island up towards St. Lawrence Island. And then there's the Arctic coast. Remember, we saw some changes there coming with the wind and blizzard conditions here. Well, that's because of winds coming out of the north and west, 40 to 45 knots. Blowing and drifting snow possible there. Northwesterly flow from Point Lay down toward Point Hope. A northerly flow inside of Kotzebue Sound. That drops off to 20 knots there as we get into Friday. And the winds subside a little bit around Barrow out toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, but still holding on to a sustained wind at 40 knots north of Kaktovik over the ice there on Friday afternoon. So still dealing with wind by the end of the week for the Arctic coast. Recapping the weather pattern there as we head through tonight and the next couple days. A cold front swinging through the interior and the north and west coast tonight, bringing snow and blowing snow and blizzard conditions to the Beaufort Seacoast. Winter storm warning for the northern parts of the Brooks Range. Winter weather advisories for parts of the interior, mainly dealing with the blowing winds there across some of the higher terrain and the summits like the Steese Highway there. So if you're in areas north and west of Fairbanks, you'll be dealing with that. The winds are setting up across south central Alaska, and for Friday night or Thursday night into Friday around the Mat-Su Valley, especially the Matanuska Valley, you're dealing with winds gusting to a potential 80 miles per hour, and around the western Kenai Peninsula it could mean increased fire danger for you, so a red flag warning is posted, and gusty winds will continue into the weekend. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.